I've always found that what makes a fighting manga truly special isn't necessarily the quality of the battles it presents. Even the most epic of shonen manga loses flavor if it fails to justify or make sense of the conflicts outlined within its pages. Take Dragon Ball Z for example. While the plot isn't the most developed, each clash against an opponent writes itself into a conscious effort by the protagonists to protect the Earth and its inhabitants, which in turn justifies their constant thirst for progression. In Grapplebaki, the subterranean wind breathing life throughout the story is more of a mythological one, with each battle existing both on a literal and allegorical level, leaving anyone unable to understand symbolism at a loss to what the show is supposed to represent. Kengan Ashura is in the same vein. If you only pay attention to the fights, you'll lose sight of the underlying societal critique happening in the background, via its portrayal of capitalism and alienation. Parallel to the bloody underground battles of the Kengan tournament exists a universe just as ruthless, that of the workplace. For the average Japanese salaryman, this is where life begins and ends. For 10 to 14 hours a day, he will be slaving away in a building, at the mercy of a boss who decides how he is to act and when he gets to leave. If his results are unsatisfying, he will bow until his forehead touches the ground, sacrificing his ego to preserve his means of subsistence. Even if he has done nothing to deserve such scorn, the hierarchical structure inherent to every company will provide the necessary power imbalance to secure his position as an inferior, waiting for others to take their days out on him. No human willingly puts themselves underneath another's boot, but when submitting becomes the only way to put food on the table, you become proficient at playing carpet. This fate extends to every single person that has decided to ascend the corporate ladder, since there will always be someone one rung above you waiting to kick down in order to preserve their spot and continue climbing. This cutthroat environment encourages predatorial behaviors of all kinds. Most companies' organigrams constituting a pecking order of sorts, while fated predators and would-be victims compete for promotions. From entry-level employee to 10-year-old boss, this dynamic never ceases to be, and anyone who decides to swim in the think tank should see that they be the shark and not the chum. This eat or be eaten mentality is a key component of capitalism, which is simply the name we give to competition within organized society when not managed by the state, making it a natural human drive. What isn't natural, however, is the grand scale on which this game takes place, that has transformed companies into international powerhouses, with each of their HQs serving as grand reminders of their power, towering over the rest of the city in a show of dominance that was once only reserved to places of worship, such as churches. And atop these temples are gods of a new kind, whose divine essence can be quantified directly by the number of zeros on their bank accounts. And since humanity's most popular religion is money, this makes them the de facto leaders of our world, with the ability to influence markets and control the fates of millions of people. Kengan Ashura doesn't shy away from this reality. If anything, it makes a show of demonstrating the absurd dominion exerted by these types, along with the manners of morals and sets of values they had to develop to attain their social statuses. The entire Kengan tournament is really an excuse to discuss the predatorial nature of entrepreneurial systems and the utter lack of fair play or justice that accompanies them. The merchants that make up the organization aim for profit and will only collaborate if it serves their interest, in a hyper-cynical display of opportunistic capitalism. Protecting one's brand name is an obligation in this world, not as a matter of pride, but as a simple necessity to not appear weak, making shenanigans like scams or fraud just part and parcel of running a business. The rules of this universe are entirely disconnected from the morality of the everyday man, making any workplace environment sides that one cannot navigate without an attitude shift, at the risk of becoming the sucker of the story. This amount of pressure is enough to make the everyday man crack, a reality that has come to be known as worker alienation. How many employees would describe their job experience as poor or otherwise stressful? It isn't because we instinctively reject work, but rather that the pyramidal structure inherent to modern companies have a tendency to crush those that serve it. We thought we were there to exchange our time for money. Turns out the contract also includes part of our soul. The decisional burden is so immense that it entirely surpasses everyday stakes, leaving your average Wagie in a constant state of agitation, afraid at the thought of losing the one thing he's got going in his life. This is how alienation operates. First, you get railroaded into a job for which you have no real passion, in order to pay the bills. You tell yourself that this will only last a time, or that you will find meaning somewhere else in your life. Next, before you know it, your job starts consuming every aspect of you, to the point that it becomes your identity, something you cannot exist without. Then the dissonance kicks in. Whatever company you belong to now both sustains and brings meaning to your life, while at the same time making every working moment miserable, which also invariably worsens your existence as a human. The existential unease of having to trade your enthusiasm for life for the ability to sustain it just a little bit longer leads to a host of unhealthy coping mechanisms, the most widespread being alcohol consumption. The pursuit of hedonism, a known symptom amongst those without agency or goal. Not only is your job vampirizing your days, but it also haunts your nights. The dread it invokes so intense that any shot at escapism is welcome, even if found at the bottom of a bottle. This is the irony of employment. You accept its chains in exchange for resources, effectively trading your freedom for material comfort that now makes you dependent on it. Everything you own, you owe to the company or the bank, meaning that you effectively don't own anything at all. This despair of having nothing to lose could be seen as the last step of labor subjugation, bringing a final end to the pain of alienation in the form of nihilism. But unfortunately for us, humans are adaptable, and even the most abject of circumstances will soon become the new normal, especially if our spirits have been conditioned to accept existence as meaningless. Any drop of freedom tastes like nectar to the man who forgot he originally owns the oasis. There is cosmic horror in capitalism. The realization that your fate resides in the hands of beings whose sole purpose is to increase their reach is not comforting, which explains why so many who dwell in this modern age hate it so. and are prompt to revolt against what they rightfully perceive to be a new god. Sadly, their rebellion is only in jest, as the power and sway of those at the top of the pyramid is too much to comprehend. Their sphere of influence extends in every direction, as there is nothing money can't buy. The consanguinity between politics and finances is at the center of the intrigue that the story presents, and it is therefore no mistake that the Don of the Kengan organization would be a head banker. Long gone are the days of the state and the church. As a system of domination, governments always prioritize influence, and so it is no surprise that we'd find our politicians in bed with corporations. And just like with any relationships, a balance of threat is established, one that doesn't seem to be in favor of executive power. Big companies strangle nations with their tentacles just as surely they do their workers. For us mere peons, there is not much we can do when faced with this Lovecraftian reality. We are at the mercy of the octopus, and at best get to witness its disappearance, armed with the intimate knowledge that another will rise in its place. Far from me the idea of demonizing such practice. Rather, I offer a diagnosis, one tainted with the cynic taste of the man who's seen the machine and has come to resent its cogs. Capitalism is an endless competition, and a tyrant is only replaced by another, without much hope for those under him, as slave and master need one another, and society is happy to provide both. While this all sounds very unjust, we could also come to the conclusion that if some get dominated, it's because they allow themselves to be, making whoever wields dominion a superior being in the natural order of things. Men striving for power rule over those who barely aim to survive. That much is certain. You could argue that taking advantage of people who struggle to get by and weaponizing their submission to further advance your position in this world isn't very moral, and you would be right. However, it would be forgetting that such ideals only apply to sheep. If predators aligned with slave morality, there wouldn't be any masters anymore. It is this refusal to follow conventions that makes capitalism so ruthless, explaining why every effort to rein it in involves attempts at regulating it. Trying to control causality is a fundamental human trait, and when you look at the catastrophes birthed from market chaos, it would only seem sensible. After all, why should we allow the lives of humans to potentially get impacted negatively by something that appears to be within our reach to rule? The issue with this line of thinking is that it ignores the many strata of influence that layer the capitalism cake. If dominance hierarchies arise within companies, it is only because these represent microcosms of real life, magnified by late-stage capitalism and the fortification of what can only be considered as a tradition of alienation. This doesn't make the system natural. Rather, it is after nature, making the efforts required to breathe order into it akin to the task of micromanaging an entire anthill, down to every insect. Thus, the strength required to successfully conduct a takeover of that magnitude would require either total dominion over financial assets or military intervention, which can only be accomplished by the likes of totalitarian states. Kengan Ashura perfectly represents this inevitability of might. Each merchant possesses his own fighters and bodyguards, to the point that the chairman has his own army. For the individual, the solution is to be found elsewhere. In the story, the character of the salaryman escapes worker alienation by simply refusing to play the game, reclaiming his identity and independence in one fell swoop. After all, predatorial capitalism is the sum of us all. As for wolves to exist, there must be sheep. By taking the human element out, the machine falls apart. For a story that insists on personal responsibility, this outcome isn't surprising. But is it realistic? No, not really. If it were as simple as just quitting, many would have done it already. As cynical as it sounds, it does appear that this would hinges on the domination of the many by the few. Not as a symbiotic, but rather reciprocally parasitic relationship. Plebeians don't like it, but also don't seem to be able to find a way out. If solution there is, it won't be at the interpersonal level, as it is what gave birth to alienation in the first place. The liberation of the many can only come from the fortitude of the one, but only if the one becomes the many.